Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy2, your service team's personal coach, giving them the process, resources, and insights to deliver the perfect customer experience over the phone. Learn more at happitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Rob Dwyer, and joining me today, I have the extreme pleasure of having the service delivery manager from Nimble, Chad Molen, on the show. Chad, how are you?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
So not only are you a fellow bearded brethren, but you and I have something even more in common. Yeah. So we both grew up in the same town, went to the same high school, just a year apart.
Yeah. Small little town of Augusta, Kansas.
It is. And it is a small little town.
Reconnected a couple months ago, and it's great. You know, it seems like when you grow up in a small town, you just can pick right back up, and it's like you never missed any time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had to spend some time catching up.
We did. Absolutely.
So you started, well, let me ask you, first of all, kind of where you got started in your kind of customer experience journey. I think I know what that is by going off of LinkedIn, but I've quickly found in this process of meeting people and talking to them that often there's a lot missing off of their LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, you know, we grew up in a small town, and I think for me, like it began way back working at Dillon's, a Kroger store, and, you know, having relationships with all these people. I mean, everybody knew me in town, and I knew them, because I either took their groceries out or I knew their kids or something. And so I think for me, like my journey on what service should look like and how that experience should be, I think started way back then. But then, you know, I realized like my parents didn't have a college fund set up for me. So when I graduated from high school, it was like, you need to get a job. And if you want to go to school, that's great. But, you know, it's going to be on your dime. So I actually started working at a plant, aircraft plant called Beechcraft, right out of high school. And I actually was the fourth generation of my family to work at that plant. So there was some really cool, you know, historical basis for working there. And I figured out that, hey, I could use tuition reimbursement and go to school at night and work and get experience at the same time. So through some really, you know, very interesting situations, I actually turned 18, I became a crew chief of a crew of like 20 people in a shop making wiring harnesses. And basically everybody that reported to me was way older than I was and thought that I was an idiot. And then once I finished my degree, I started working over on the spare side. So I moved from the union side to the dark side of salaried folks and started working selling spare parts for airplanes. So that was a really cool experience. And I think for me, like probably one of the biggest foundations of, you know, how I developed customer service, because at the end of the day, we would get a variety of people, including people that own their own airplanes that like to work on them themselves. And so in a lot of cases, you're talking with either very wealthy people or people that are, you know, definitely used to having things their way. And money in a lot of cases wasn't, you know, something that they were that concerned about. So that to me was kind of like a good setting for what customer experience should look like.
Yeah. So for those who are listening and watching that aren't from where we're from, I should clarify that Beechcraft is now called Raytheon. But everybody, I think, of our generation who grew up in that area, like we will always think of it as Beechcraft. That's just that's the name that that sticks for us, and
Well,
that is
I'll take it a step further. Not only are they not owned by Raytheon anymore, but they're actually owned by Textron, which is the owner of Cessna. So what used to be a bitter rivalry on either side of town for small general aviation aircraft, they're now the same company, which is really
yeah.
odd.
Yeah, it's I think for those of us that grew up in that area, the connections with the aviation industry run really, really deep because I think everybody had a family member, whether it was a really close family member or maybe a distant family member that worked at kind of
Yeah.
one of the big 3 or 4 companies in town that were involved in aviation in Wichita. And that included at the time, Boeing, Cessna, Beechcraft, and then there are some parts manufacturers there as well. So
And
there's a
Learjet,
lot.
actually.
Oh yeah, and Learjet, yeah.
And believe it or not, this is kind of sad, but I think it was 2 weeks ago. They basically celebrated the last Learjet rolling off the line.
Oh man.
So Learjet as an actual brand is not around anymore.
Wow, I did
Yeah.
not know that.
Yeah.
I haven't been keeping up, but you clearly
I mean,
have.
I'm not even in Kansas anymore, but I don't. It runs in my blood, like you say. You
Yeah.
never really can get totally away from it. So yeah.
Yeah, even you mentioned another company, and so you did a little bit of a clarification there, but Dillon's was a grocery store, right? It had its roots in Kansas. It was eventually acquired by Kroger.
Yeah.
Kroger has this thing that they do, and they acquire uh, other brands. They keep the brand name, so there are a lot of different brand names
Yeah.
underneath Kroger. Why do I know this? Because I also worked at a Dillon's and I worked at a Quick Shop, which was a convenience store that was also a Kroger brand when I was in college. And so I know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to that customer service mentality. When you work for those retail places, you really get a good foundation of service if you're working in the right places.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, anything from the practical, like, the rights and wrongs of how to sack up somebody's groceries to,
Yeah.
striking up conversations on the way out to the car and all those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. These were the days when number one, paper bags were probably more common than
Yeah. Yeah.
plastic bags. Kind of
Which
wish
are
we'd
a
get
heck of a
back to
lot
that.
easier. Those are a heck of a lot easier to stack than these flimsy little bags that we have now.
They are. And certainly, I don't know if all places were like this because, I grew up the same place you grew up, but yeah, the depending on who you were, right? The person that was bagging your groceries would even take them out to your car and load them for you, particularly if you happen to be elderly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if that happened everywhere, but it certainly happened at our little Dillon's. That I do know.
Absolutely. And there'd always be people that really were definitely backwoods that would only come into town like once a month or so. And I'd enjoy bagging up their stuff and taking it out to their car and yeah, catching up and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, very, very fun trip down memory lane there. So you spent a lot of time at Raytheon and did a lot of different things. So tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that
Sure.
progression because you certainly didn't stay in one spot there.
No, no. It seemed like I think once I got my degree, it was kind of every 2 years I was doing something different. But typically I stayed. So I mean, the first part of my time there was in production, producing things. And so like I said, so the funny story is, it was a union shop. Um, they were having a second shift open up for a crew chief position. They're basically like a supervisor now. But usually that's done by like a seniority list. It's not really done by go in and interview and you pick the best person. It's done by seniority. So, it's kind of funny because all these people on this first shift thought there's no way I would go to second shift. I would probably die there. And so I was literally like maybe 5 or 6 from the bottom of the seniority list. And they called me up and they said, "Hey, do you want to come be a crew chief on second shift?" So, even though it wasn't like facing like the public or a customer, one thing that I really learned a lot is just, taking care of people. And, I had a guy that literally he was 76 years old. He didn't have to work because he'd worked for 40-ish years and had probably an unbelievable pension. But his daughter had diabetes and she had to have her legs amputated. And so he was going to continue to work and take care of her. And I swear, like, I think for me, besides growing up in Augusta and kind of out in the country, working with people that had like an amazing work ethic really, developed for me what my work ethic should be. And this guy would work circles around everybody in the shop and just had like the most amazing like servant kind of attitude where, if he would never be standing around, he'd always be moving around and things like that. So it was a good transition for me once I went to school and got my degree to transition over to spare sales. And pretty quickly, I mean, basically I was like a CSR. So I was selling stuff. So it was a little bit of order management and then just kind of answering questions for customers. And I got into we had a new VP start for us, and he came from Walmart, the youngest VP that they'd ever had before. And the guy was on fire. Like I remember he came at like 5 o'clock one night when I was just finishing up a call. He had been like leaning over my cubicle and listening to the phone call. And he said, "You really get some strange calls later in the day, don't you?" And I turned around and I'm like, yeah, I do. And that turned into, a long discussion about service and why he changed a completely different industry. And what happened out of that eventually was that we put a big effort on CRM. So CRM was kind of like at its infancy then. And Siebel was kind of the top, kind of the best of breed. I don't know if you remember Siebel.
Wow. I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Which it's just funny to me because I don't know how they made it to the top other than, maybe there were a lot of large companies that had enough people to really admin the program, but it wasn't that easy to administrate and set up. But that kind of started my journey on CRM. So kind of working through that, doing training and development and stuff. That's another thing I'm super passionate about is just, you can have the best systems and things in the world, but if you don't have people that are trained appropriately, that, understand the products that they're supporting, you're going to fall flat. So to me, that really kind of started my life passion with customer service and training and really people development are the big three things that I love to do.
Yeah, it strikes me, and I think that this is something that leaders can all learn for, both in their own organizations, but even more when you go into a new organization. And that is the time you spend like really digging into what's really happening with that customer relationship and what's going on there. So that to have that VP leaning over and listening to a call when he probably could have been doing a lot of other things and no one would have questioned it says a lot to me about him really wanting to understand like what's really going on here so that I can learn this business. Because coming from Walmart, like that's a very different business.
Absolutely.
Very different.
Well, and he primarily was in IT as well on the Walmart side, so not even really on the service side at all. The thing that I really appreciated about him the most was he took that to the nth degree, where he would literally get up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, go to the flying club, and he would fly to get his personal pilot's license because he was intent on understanding what it was like to be a pilot and to translate that into the kind of service that we deliver to customers. So I love that. And to this day, I mean, he rose all the way up to like president of Boeing Aviation Services, which is basically like the service arm of Boeing. And he's doing consulting and stuff now, but he was one of those people that, you know, beyond like the service side, he also was like, I don't know if you've ever worked for somebody that, you know, they would say, we're going to do this. And your first thought was like, this guy is crazy, you know, there was no questioning. We were going to hit the quarter. We were going to do this thing or whatever. And we did it every time. And that really impacted me that, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of what you accomplish has to do with your tenacity and ability to motivate people in the right direction.
Yeah, when you say that, I immediately have one person that comes into my mind. And Dean, if you're listening, you were this person, and I don't think I've told you this. So Dean Gress, who I worked with really for a pretty short time, but I remember he would absolutely challenge me and say what he really wanted was right for us to have confidence that we could do something that maybe we didn't think we can do, but also think outside the box and come up with alternate solutions. And I learned a lot in that sometimes it made me very uncomfortable because I was like, I don't know, that's not going to work. Right. But then when it's like, no, this is what's going to happen, then you just have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the direction.
Yeah. And one of the things that I liked during that time that I had there was we did some strategic planning, and it was so interesting because we picked a bunch of companies that we wanted to look at and kind of shadow basically their service experience. And it was such a variety of companies. It was Caterpillar, it was Lexus. It was, you know, you don't put aviation, like general aviation, like business jets and that stuff together, but at the end of the day, it's still, you know, people spending money, deciding how they're going to spend their money. And, you know, when they're looked as the JD Power or whatever you want to call it, you know, the top of the top, there's lessons to be learned from those companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was a really cool experience to go through. Awesome.
So you eventually, I mean, you spent a lot of time at Raytheon, but eventually you moved on. So tell us about the next company that you moved to, which I think eventually led to you relocating to where you are now in Colorado.
Yeah. So I think I had worked 11 years at Raytheon. I had actually just finished getting my Six Sigma black belt. So for those of you that aren't continuous improvement folks, it's not karate. It's actually you know, an improvement methodology with tools and things that it's actually an extremely rigorous process that you have to go through. And then you have to present to business leaders from all over the company, and they decide whether you get the pass or not. So I finished that, and I was kind of like, you know, I actually love that, but I want to use it in the application of service again. So it's so weird because I really wasn't like super actively looking, but this recruiter calls me one day and she says, I want you to come talk with us. We're a new manufacturing company that makes heating and plumbing systems. We just purchased a company in McPherson, Kansas, which is just right along the I-35 corridor up towards Salina and Topeka. I know you probably have never heard of us before, but we'd really like to talk to you about our customer service department. So I ended up coming in, talking to the VP of sales and the VP of ops, who the VP of sales eventually became the CEO of a company called Viga. So it was basically a small little subdivision of a German company that had been around for 115 years. And, at first, to me, like every place that I work for, I really need to be passionate about the products or the culture and the brand. And so I was real leery at first because I just didn't know if I could be passionate about plumbing and heating as I was about aircraft. But lo and behold, they actually brought some innovative products to market that had never been here in the U.S. before. Basically, able to like connect pipes together without any kind of soldering or grooving or any kind of a nasty mechanical process. Basically, just pressing a fitting onto a piece of pipe. So it revolutionized the plumbing and heating industry. I mean, it's literally like 60-70% less time to install than a regular fitting. So I did get actually pretty excited about that. And but it was interesting because they had just acquired this company and they had a small little headquarter building in Boston. So I had to relocate anybody that wanted to come from Boston to Wichita, which was not very many people. And then there was a customer service team in McPherson for the other company. And we had to basically combine together. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I had relating back to your point about understanding the business, it was a B2B type thing. So it was through distributors. So you don't ever really talk to the people who are physically installing the products. You talk to, people that have your product as well as 50 other brands in their warehouse. So that was an interesting change. And these two companies were completely different from each other. The way they went to market, one company used outside manufacturers reps. So basically a hired sales team that didn't work for the company. And then the German company was completely like, no, we will only have company salespeople and they will, drink the Kool-Aid and do everything that we want them to do. And they'll drive the same car that has our logo on it and all that fun stuff. So that was really interesting to take both of those cultures, which had a lot of value in each one of them, and kind of meld them together and also recognize from a customer side that customers aren't immediately going to just, come around to, oh, you're this German company now. Because especially if you think about the trades, for example, the trades are very loyal to products, and they, especially here in the US, made in the USA products.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge to try to, market that correctly and, make people excited about the products and all that. So it was awesome. I think for me, to learn the marketing side that I'd never really learned as much at Beechcraft, and understand relationships between businesses, distributors and manufacturers, and how delicate that is. Because, at the end of the day, the distributor wants to make money. I mean, they like your product to a certain extent, but if they can find somebody else's product and it does the same thing and they can make more money off of it, that's what they're going to do. So it's very interesting to kind of help balance all of those factors. So I spent a good 2.5 years over the customer service side. And at the time, that was part of the ops team. So they basically decided to merge the ops and supply chain together, and decided that customer service would be better under sales than under supply chain. So with my supply chain experience, I ended up taking kind of a detour over to the supply chain side and did a lot of I wouldn't say boring, but less, interesting things than working in customer service. But I got to learn how things are made, got to buy a lot of super expensive machinery, got to help build a campus that is now something like, I don't know, probably 200 acres or so. If you ever drive on 135, you can't miss it when you're going through McPherson. There's 3 very large buildings that total over 1 million square feet. That's all either manufacturing space or distribution space. And I think for me, again, I had to be very passionate about products that my company makes. It was a great company to work for, to see that progression, massive amounts of growth, compounded annual growth rate of 10 to 15%, for probably 5 or 6 years straight after the
Wow.
recession. So that didn't come without its challenges, but everything's a learning experience, and it was definitely exciting to build a customer. So I ended up, how I came to Colorado is, the company decided to relocate the headquarters, not anything else, but the headquarters from Wichita to Broomfield, Colorado. So I had a very quick decision to make. I think it was a good decision. I love Colorado. It's definitely more expensive to live here, but I love it, and there's a lot of great things to do. So we packed up the family and came here, and I ended up switching back to customer service at the same time. So basically, I had to start over completely fresh with rebuilding a whole team, because rarely customer service people are going to relocate. They just it just doesn't work out that way. So
Yeah.
that was really interesting, but it was a great opportunity to kind of have a clean slate and kind of start over again to a certain extent. So that team is now something like 40, 45 people strong, and doing extremely well. So I'm very happy about the things that I got to do there, and the time that I spent there, 14 years. So yeah, probably a little bit more of a lengthy explanation than you needed, but
No, that's a whole career in and of itself. And when you were talking about the passion, the thing that struck me was that you were able to transition. Now, granted, you had some existing foundational knowledge and skill set in another area of the business that I'm sure came in handy. But I think when you really are excited about an organization and kind of the mission and what you're doing, that it makes it a lot easier to make that pivot into something new that maybe you're not super comfortable with, and
yeah.
go, okay, well, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And hopefully you've got some leeway to make some missteps along the way if you're not really experienced in it. But that's a great way to grow and learn and get just a whole different understanding of the way a business operates when you're able to do something like that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm most proud of with that experience is just I help kind of make bridge the gap between the supply chain people and the salespeople, because I think what the salespeople didn't realize was the fact that all of our distributors that buy products from us are supply chain people. So when they would bring me along on sales calls or different things like that, we'd start, chatting about all these things that have to do with products and manufacturing and distribution. And these guys would just sit back and be like, I have no idea what they're talking about. But they, when you start talking about, oh, we can save you money, or this is how you organize your warehouse, or you need to be using tools like EDI and, some digitalization kind of things. And they start perking up, because it's like, yeah, I could care less about your products. Really, I want to make more money. So how can you make more money and help me ship things faster? So
Yeah.
that was a really interesting connection that I don't think that had ever been made before.
Well, and I think you bring up something that's really important, which is really good salespeople understand the business, not
Yeah.
just the product. They understand the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that makes a huge difference, right? I mean, really, if you get people that understand the business and can just talk about that and understand what people are trying to achieve, you can put them in sales. And they may go, I'm not a salesperson, but that's what it's all about, is understanding the problems that you're trying to achieve, understanding how whatever you offer can do that, and being able to develop a relationship with someone. That's what good salespeople do.
Well, it's especially important when you're not selling a commodity product. You're selling a product that in some cases was 15 to 20% higher than, a similar product out on the market, there's so many other factors that you got to pull in and talking about that, really helps them see the full picture. Because if they only look at this fitting costs $200, that's kind of a non-starter with them. I can get a fitting that I solder for $50 less, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? I have to show you what the actual value is, not the face value, but what's the downstream value? What do I get for that extra $50? And once you understand that, if there really is a good value proposition, well, then it just sells itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I always told those guys, like, I should get a little portion of your bonus because I'm helping you sell and you don't have to do a whole lot.
Yeah. They
But
should
it
have
was
just moved
good.
you
It
into
was,
sales.
yeah. I mean, it was good because I did realize, like, I don't know, sometimes people think sales and they think like, car salesman kind of, mentality and stuff. And, I've met so many salespeople that are some of the hardest working people that I've ever seen. Getting up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, driving 3 or 4 hours during the day to different places. Sometimes having doors shut on them, time and time again. So I not only respect salespeople more, but I also consider myself a salesperson now, because ultimately, like you said, no matter where you work in a company, you're selling that company to somebody, whether it's a customer or it's a potential person that might want to be hired by that company, or just in general, like giving goodwill to the community and stuff. It's important to sell yourself and sell the company,
Yeah, 100%. So eventually, you even left that career, right? And it's almost like 2 separate careers you've had now. So, and that's assuming that we don't count Dylan's. So, so then you ended up at Nimble. So tell us about Nimble and kind of what you're doing today.
So I pretty much have been using SAP, which, probably anybody that works in a corporate world for any size, medium to large size company probably has heard of SAP, probably uses SAP. But it's the leading ERP system that's out there. And I used it way back when Beechcraft, I'm sure you remember the big, 1999, Y2K thing,
Oh yeah.
they
I think
bought,
everyone remembers that. That's at least
yeah,
of a certain
yeah.
age.
I mean, they bought that hook, line, and sinker. It was like, we're on like basically an IBM mainframe. What's going to happen? We need to look at, what we need to do. And SAP was the fit for them. So I was involved a little bit at the beginning, but ultimately I ended up using that because also Viga, the German company I'd worked for, they used SAP as well. And I implemented kind of part of it. So basically I kind of was looking for, I'm in Denver now. Denver is a fairly large tech hub, a lot of startups and things like that. And so I really wanted to get into tech and see what that was like. And so I happened to establish a really good relationship with a company that they basically made a bolt-on for SAP. And this guy knew of a consulting firm here in Denver that was like a startup, and they had an opening for a service delivery manager. So a service delivery manager, basically, it's kind of like if you've ever seen Office Space and they're interviewing the guy and they say, what is it exactly that you do here? I'm the guy that talks to the really smart people and make sure things get done and that we get them taken care of. So I kind of work on they call it application managed services, but basically instead of a company like hiring and staffing a large SAP support team, they basically hire us to do that. So they may have a couple people in their IT department that are SAP people, but then we basically have a service agreement with them that they buy, service from us every month. So I track it, whether it's based on the tickets that they submit or hours that they pay for. I meet with them. I make sure that, we take care of their tickets in a timely manner, that we're consuming the hours that they bought, and everything in between. So I think one of the first things that I learned is, and ultimately, I think this is probably a good thing in life in general, but I don't ever get too comfortable where you're at, because then you stop learning.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to throw yourself in the mix of something completely different and just try to sink or swim. It's good for you. It's stressful, but it's good for you in the long run. I thought I knew SAP, but I barely didn't know anything. So it's been a year and a half of like being probably the quietest person in the room listening. But the service kicks in, because it doesn't matter what, I mean, my product now is service, period, like pure and simple. So, we hinge on getting their problems taken care of, or if they have enhancements, or, they need consulting advice on, hey, what should we do? Should we upgrade this, or should we, redesign this process or whatever? At the end of the day, it all comes down to service. So, that's what I've been doing. And then also I had another gift, about halfway through my time here. My boss, or our IT manager, quit. And all of a sudden my boss is saying, hey, we'd like you to manage the service desk. You've done that before, right? And I'm like, I've managed customer service. Service desk is not exactly the same thing. So I took that on. And then at the same time, that guy was supposed to work with me to implement Jira, which is our ITSM solution. And I ended up kind of doing it myself with some help from another internal person. And then I hired a guy from the outside. But so it's been a year and a half of a lot of learning, and a lot of, totally different thing than I'd done in my past. So like you said, this is kind of my third career since I graduated.
A lot of excitement going on in that world. And
Yes.
When, wearing those multiple hats, and I think that's a common theme that when I talk to people that are involved with startups, like all of this, sometimes, right, it's just whoever we think can maybe do this other thing over here. Like we just don't have anybody for this, but it needs to be done. And sometimes that just ends up in someone's lap, whether they really are excited for it or not. But it's a great opportunity then to expand your knowledge base and what you know, and then you can draw in some skills and some knowledge from other things that you've done that can, there's just so much transferability when you're talking about service, and whether that's customer service. Tech support is a little bit different depending on the type of tech support that you're doing, but a lot of those same principles transfer over. And it's just how do I tweak this a little bit, and how do I achieve maybe something that is better than what we're achieving today?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because and I don't say this in a bad way at all, because it doesn't matter what industry I've worked in, but the people with the technical knowledge, they're really good at the hands-on stuff, or explaining that hands-on stuff. But kind of like the normal everyday, like, this is how you handle a call, this is how you handle a ticket, this is how you talk to people. Those things tend to struggle a little bit, So that's a big challenge. And I mean, ultimately kind of why I'm here too, because at the end of the day, I need to help translate sometimes, because sometimes things just get lost in translation.
Yeah, it's all about those different skills and understanding how something works and how to fix it, and why it's behaving in a specific way. that's a set of skills, right? A lot of it based on experience and digging in and learning about things, just like how we talk to someone who's frustrated and doesn't understand the jargon and just wants it fixed, but also probably needs to understand what caused that so it doesn't happen again, and do all of that in a nice way that doesn't make them feel stupid. Like that's a whole different set of skills. And they don't often come in the same package, prepackaged. You do have to like, okay, you've got this side. Let's work on this side now.
Yeah, you pay me to fix stuff. I fixed it. I'm on to the next thing.
Right.
But I want to fix it permanently. Stay around. Let's talk about it, So I've been able to kind of pull in some of my continuous improvement stuff. And, to me, when it gets down to it, like I've seen so many, like companies tend to do system implementations pretty badly. And it doesn't matter whether you hire somebody to do it or you do it internally. You don't think through your processes. You don't think through, the change management. Change management is huge. So that's something that I did like right before I left my last company is I went and got a certification in change management. And so I can't say that I've applied it perfectly all the time, but just being able to size up like, your population of users and, figure out like, where are these people, because people put on a great face and say, hey, I'll do whatever you want me to, boss. And then behind the scenes, they're actively like, how do I shut this freaking thing down? Like, I don't want to do it. And none of my coworkers want to do it. Like, we're going to just derail this thing, So
yeah, you know what? You bring up a really important point. And this is something that I learned a long time ago, but I think we forget in managing change. You have to identify those people because they're actually the people that are going to help you the most.
Absolutely.
The problem is if you're not bringing them in early and making them almost like a stakeholder so that they can be your champion, they do exactly what you're talking about, which is how do I sabotage all of this because I want no part of it? And they will absolutely talk to everyone else. And they typically have like that influence with their peer group. And so everyone else is thinking the same thing. They're like, oh, we don't want to do this. And then it's not about, okay, it's not a software problem or a hardware problem, regardless of what the implementation is, right? It's a change management problem and a people problem. And you didn't address that. You just said, oh, hey, here's the solution. And they were like, no, I don't want any part of that.
Yeah. And I really learned that the hard way with like CRM when we did our first implementation, because you can lead a horse to water, but it won't always drink, and so if you don't really spend a lot of time in messaging, what's changing and why, because at the time, like, with ERP systems, it's a little bit easier because that's how you do business. Like if you take an order, you got to do an order in the system. You can't write it up on a tablet or something like that, but when it comes to CRM, it's like, oh, well, maybe this is an optional thing because I don't have to document that call or I don't have to do this or that. And I think, that also leads to, I think, a huge gap in CRM in general from a philosophical standpoint. Like companies, it's crazy. They employ all these things like HubSpot and all these like very complicated marketing programs. But the dumb thing is you have your customer base calling you on a regular basis for a myriad of different things, throwing out keywords and hints and all this kind of stuff about opportunities, and they completely just blow that away because they don't think like, well, yeah, we're taking care of customers, but we're not looking for sales opportunities, so there's a lot of lessons learned there that I've definitely encountered.
Yeah. And there are so many sales opportunities during those phone calls.
Yeah.
So many opportunities. But if you don't know, and that is one of the challenges, if you're just using a CRM, is that it doesn't actually capture everything that's happening on that phone call. It captures what that person chooses to say happened on that phone call. And if you actually understand what's truly happening on all of your phone calls, that can really change your perception on how you can do things. So really interesting perspective there.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, man, it's been so great to catch up with you again. You are my first, not only Kansas born guest,
Really?
but my first guest from the hometown. And
wow,
so
that's an
it's
honor,
really
man.
exciting.
I appreciate that.
I don't bring on just anyone. I'm picky on this show.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and it was really great to reconnect with you a couple months ago, and I feel like I could probably talk to you for many hours more, but definitely appreciate the opportunity to talk about something I'm very passionate about. So,
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I know that there's a whole town that's probably going to spike my listenership, if just for one episode. So,
I hope so.
well, Chad, I appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, sir.